All right, so we're gonna get started here with a quick, this is like a brief intro to pin tumbler lock functionality and picking, after this, I think we're going to open it up and people can have a go at all the locks that we have, and we also have a more in-depth presentation that we might do at some point later on too, covering some of the things that we actually do have here, locks with security pins and stuff like that. But this will be just like the basics, like for people that have never lockpicked before, or they have played around and they don't know what all the things are called and stuff like that. So first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to Tool, the US division, so the open organization of lockpickers. So they provide these slides and have been super helpful to me in a lot of lockpicking endeavors. So mad props to those guys, and especially Max from Tool Boston. So this is the presentation of theirs. I modified it a little bit, but mostly it's the presentation of theirs that they give for maker fairs and sort of like less security focused places. So it's a real intro sort of thing. But Tool's like super interested in all kinds of lockpicking and impressioning and just like super lock nerds. So they have this presentation making everyone excited about lockpicking. It's fun. And I'm going to cover their rules out of respect for their organization, and also to be informative. So the Tool rules, only 2 rules, which are don't pick locks that you don't own, because that's not neighborly, and don't pick your own locks if they are locks that you rely on for your security, because picking does slightly damage locks, right? The act of picking wears down the pins, and eventually your key will not work. So, buy practice locks, unless they're high security, are cheap. And there's sort of 3 types of, lock opening without a key. Lock picking, which is what we're doing. Quick and dirty lock opening, like cutting locks, for example. And then covert and high-tech lock opening. So lock picking is what we're doing, quick and dirty is what criminals do, and covert and high-tech is what spies do. And again, disclaimer for Tool. Tool provides the knowledge and the means for lock picking, the knowledge about what criminals do, but that doesn't encourage it or give means, and nothing about what spies do. So lock picking, at least getting started, is really easy. The 2 basic tools for pin tumbler locks are visible in that image. So you have a tension tool, sometimes also called a torque tool, which is for turning the lock, and then the pick itself, which gets inserted in and manipulates the pins. And it works on doorknobs, it works on padlocks, it works on deadbolts. These are all standard locks that use what's called a pin tumbler mechanism. So mechanism is the same in all of them. If you cut away that face, what you see is a spring, a top pin, and a bottom pin. And when it's in its normal locked configuration like this, the bottom pin is all the way down, and the top pin is down so that the plug, which is that yellow, the darker yellow part, cannot turn because it's being blocked by the top pin, and the spring is pushing it down. So if you attempt to stick a screwdriver or something in that lock and turn it, what's going to happen is that top pin is going to jam it, and it can't turn. When you put the key in, the key raises the top pin, it raises both pins, raises the pin stack exactly the right amount so that the gap between the top pin and the bottom pin, which is called the shear line, lines up with the circumference of the plug, so the plug can rotate. So if we look at it from the side, most locks have more than 1 pin. We actually do have a 1-pin lock here, so you can practice just picking 1 pin, but it's easy. They have a stack of varying depth. You'll typically encounter 4 to 7 pins in a stack. And if you stick a key in, the key is cut to different depths that line up with each of those individual pins. And the way the key is cut to match those pins so that the shear line perfectly lines up is called the bitting of the key. So when you put it all the way in, it pushes through and everything lines up perfectly and you can turn that plug. And if your key is a little bit messed up, for example, after you've used the key a lot and maybe it's worn down a little bit, so now it's one bitting too low, you can see that one pin doesn't line up to the shear line and it's going to jam and the key won't work anymore. Similarly, if you're cutting a key and you accidentally don't cut it deep enough, you've got one bitting too high, again, the shear line doesn't line up perfectly and the key does not work. So what we want to do using a lockpick is we want to manipulate those pins in order to make them all line up at the shear line. And so what you do is you insert the torque tool or the turning tool, and one of those pins is going to bind up and stick. And then if you're doing single pin picking, you're going to use your pick to find the one that's sticking and push it up until it doesn't stick anymore. And then you repeat that process for all of the pins. I guess we might as well let this animation go through, because once again, mad props to Deviant Ollam from Tool, who did all these animated GIFs. They're a really nice demonstration of what's happening. You can sort of see what's going on here on the animation, but I laser cut a little demo thing of a single pin stack here, and so you can manipulate this and you can see you can push up the top and the bottom pin just like you would with a lockpick, and this piece it turns. It's a little hard. It's not the smoothest mechanism here. But if I can call for a volunteer from the audience here, maybe Tux, if I apply some torque to this mechanism and he's picking it, then you can see it turns. So, why does this even work, right? Because you've got this stack of pins, and why is one of them sticking? In a perfect world, everything would line up exactly so, and when you turned the lock, they would all stick at the same time, and all those pins would bind, and you wouldn't get any ability to go one by one through the pins. But in the real world, the holes look like this in the plug. You can't drill exactly perfectly in the same spot. The pins have deformities to them too. And so what really happens is we get one, sometimes a couple of pins binding when we torque the plug. So what's happening from the front view here is when we lift that pin, with torque on the plug actually moves a little bit, and so you can feel it. It's really, lock picking is partly a kind of a haptic activity. It's sort of something that you can do with your eyes closed because you're doing it by feel. And when that happens, you'll feel it click into place, and you'll also notice that once it snaps in there, the bottom pin, the key pin, can still move. So it'll become loose, and you can notice it just wiggling in there when you touch it with the pick. So this is that same animation we already showed. Won't run it through again, but doing the pins one after the other. One thing, though, to pay attention to is the fact that you can overlift a pin. So what that means, pretty self-explanatory, is that you've pushed the pin stack up so that the shear line is above the line where the plug rotates, and now it's basically permanently jammed because you're putting torque on it that's stopping that bottom pin from falling back down again. So I think it's the last pin here that it happens to. There's the overlift, and it's jammed there because you're turning the plug. So that's very common to happen when you're picking a lock. You eventually get better at not doing it, but if you think that might have happened, if you've been picking for a while and you're not getting anywhere, it's very, very common to back off your tension a little bit, and you'll hear it click, 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 click. You'll usually even be able to count the number of pins just by listening to it, how many was set, and they'll all drop back down again, and you start again. But you'll see when people are picking, they'll back off a little bit and let everything settle back down and start again in case they have an overlifted pin. Some types of padlocks, you can actually pick them by overlifting all the pins because the space above where the spring is really long because of the way the padlocks are manufactured. So that's really common with, I don't know if we have any here, the brass-bodied padlocks. Yeah, probably these cutaways you can do it too. But so that one there that's in front of Joe, you could totally pick that. And they make picks that are called comb picks. So they have a whole bunch of fingers like a comb, and you just push all the pins above the shear line and just open the padlock. It's great, instant gratification. So here's some other tools. So the pick that was in all those animations was a hook pick, right? So just a single little finger. There's also a type of pin called a rake. So it's got a wiggly piece to it. And then we also have some other rakes here that you can play with that are called L rakes that have kind of a lot of teeth to them. And what happens here, you torque the lock, and then you stick your rake in, and you're just basically wiggling all those pins. And as they line up to the shear, it opens. And so this works well on cheap, crappy padlocks and things like that don't have security pins in them, which is something that we're not going to cover in this quick intro, but security pins are designed to make the plug bind at places where the lock won't open, so to thwart lock picking. The half diamond is the one in the middle here. Totally lives up to the name. It's just got a sort of diamond-shaped point. And so this is a nice multi-purpose pick. And for years, before I really knew anything about lock picking, when I was just kind of messing around, I used the half diamond for everything because you can do everything with it. So you can lift individual pins, you can push it forward and back, and you can do raking and shoveling with it. And then a cool thing you can do with it is you can use the flat underside to lift all the pins and then pull the thing back slowly to count the pin stack. So if you have a lock and you don't know how many pins it's got, you use the back of your half diamond and you pull it back slowly and you listen for the pins to click back down. Tick, 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 and then you know how many pins are in the lock. Just a few quick words on technique. The amount of tension you use on the tension tool is really important. And most beginners tend to torque the lock way too much. They'll push way too hard on it. That actually makes your life really difficult because you're binding a pin, but you still need to move it, right? So if you're cranking in tons of tension on the lock, you can't move that pin up and down to where you need it to go. So it's recommended not to pull the tension tool like that with your thumb because it's harder to calibrate the tension you put on it. It's much better to push from the side there. So that's trying to rotate the plug clockwise from this point of view. And even better is to push all the way out on the tip, because then you've got lots of leverage, and just small amounts of change to your finger pressure can dramatically change the amount of tension you're putting on the plug. A good way to sort of, if you're starting off, you're a beginner, you're like, well, how do I know how much pressure to put on it, right? One way is to sort of just wiggle a pin and find a sticking pin and see if you can move it. If you can't move it, you're putting too much tension on it. Looking at the tip of your finger when you're pressing on the tension tool is a good way to do it. So if you look right at the fingertip there, you can see it's just slightly turning a little bit white. Whereas too much pressure, you can see a big white spot there on the tip of the finger. So you're sort of pushing the blood out of your finger. That's too much pressure. You'll normally, with a typical tension wrench, put it down the bottom at the very edge of the plug and push from there. And most of the turning tools you'll see look like this, usually just an L shape, but sometimes you can get ones that are have a wheel to it to make it sort of easier to get your hand around it, or ones that are double-ended. And so you'll have usually a longer part of the L at one end and a shorter at the other end, depending on how much room there is in the keyway. Space in the keyway is important because if you're turning from the edge of the plug there and your tension tool is going a long way in, you only have this much space to get your pick in. And if you want to sort of change the angle that you're picking at and stuff like that, then how far that tension tool is protruding into the keyway can affect it. You also have to be careful not to grind the tension tool against the outside of the lock. You just only want to be turning that plug. You don't want to use friction against, be applying friction against the outside of the lock, because that's just going to make it challenging to feel what's happening in the lock and put the right amount of tension on it. You can also get these flat turning tools that allow you to turn from the center of the plug. So they're turning right in the middle, level with the pins, and so now you've got all this space underneath to get a pick in under and move things up. But it depends on the lock, what one you want to use. You'll notice the example here in this image has a very simple keyway, right? So the shape of the key in cross section is called the keyway, and some locks have like a really messed up keyway that makes it hard to get tension tools and picks into the lock. So sometimes you'll use a skinnier tension tool because you've got a crazy keyway, or sometimes you want to turn from the center. It really depends on the lock. Another important thing is which direction. It depends on the lock. So padlocks generally go clockwise. Doorknobs generally counterclockwise, except for schlags, which go clockwise. And then if you encounter a deadbolt, well, which way are you going to turn it? It depends which side the door opens on and which side of the door that the deadbolt is installed on, because the key is always going to turn in the direction that it's going to mechanically retract the deadbolt. So for a left-handed door, you're going to turn counterclockwise because the deadbolt's going to go this way from your point of view. Right-handed door, clockwise because the deadbolt comes back that way, in general. But you can also design a deadbolt to work the other way. So you just got to see how it goes. This is the tool slide. So tool has these practice locks, which I'll show you. We don't have any of their locks, so this slide is not true for us. We have different locks that will turn in different directions, but some of our locks work in both directions. And so that's basically it. Here's just a quick image of what the tool practice locks look like. You can order them online if you decide that this is a lot of fun and you want to get into this. They have all kinds of different difficulty levels, and then ones with security pins. And we have padlocks, and padlocks generally clockwise opening. Just to get started, try lifting single pins with a hook and seeing where that pin binds. We do have that one pin lock somewhere, which Tux can tell you which one it is. And do some direct lifting, do some rocking lifting where you change the angle of the pick. Try some raking. We have some rakes, and now I think, well, we have 15 rakes, I think, right? Something like that. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of people here, which is awesome. So we probably have, I don't know, 30 or 40 picks at least, but we may not have enough for everyone to immediately get a pick and a lock. So, you know, split up into groups. Make a friend, whatever. But the two most important things: relax. If you're really grabbing everything and you're, you know, oh my God, what's happening here? You won't be as good at picking. So it's a very zen activity. Just like sort of chill out, small tension, small movements, and let people know when you open a lock. Yell out "open" and you know, let everyone know that you're having some fun with it. So. Thanks to all you guys for watching. Thanks again to Tool for letting us use their amazing materials here, which is all available on their website. And I'll plug them again. Consider signing up and joining them. They're a fun bunch of people to hang out with. Thanks.